y'all, it's your girl Ariza, licensed clinical social worker, test prep guru, your personal hype squad, whatever you need me to be to help you pass this exam. I've helped dozens of people do it before you, and I'm here to help you now. Whether it's your LCSW or your LMSW, this is where you come to get the tools, the strategies, and the confidence you need to level up and pass this exam. So we're going to talk today about, can you guys even guess? I'm sure you probably saw the title of the video, but we're going to be talking about 3 family theory specialists, I guess. Let me share my screen for you real quick. We're going to be talking about Bowen, Minuchin, and Satir. Yes, 3 of them bad boys today. We're going to be talking about the family therapy legends, and I'm going to simplify for you. You know that's what you're here for. You didn't come here just to watch another video. You came here so you can learn and walk away like, damn, she broke that thing down. Yes, that's what you came here for. So I'm going to give you exactly what you came for and make sure that you're able to understand and walk away knowing these 3 legends a little bit easier and a little bit more simplified. So when you take the exam, you can spot it out and say, your girl on LCSW Vibes told me that. And she did a great breakdown and it's coming back to me right now while I'm taking this exam. And then you reach back out to me and say, guess what? I passed that exam. I got my license today and I appreciate the help and I appreciate that video because it was information on there. I didn't really know it until then, but you helped. All right, you get the idea. I'm gonna go ahead and jump into the video. All right, so when it comes to family therapy pioneers, you have Bowen, Salvador Minuchin, and Virginia Satir. They created the foundational frameworks that continue to shape clinical practice and social work licensure exams across the board. This is where, and in this video, we're going to learn the core concepts, some clinical interventions, and how it is relevant for the ASWB exam. So we're going to focus on it that way. And hopefully it becomes a little bit more clearer. So when you're taking the test, you can understand what you're looking for and how. So let's start out with Bowen's family systems theory. So when we look at the theoretical foundations here, Bowen revolutionized psychiatry. He pretty much helped shift the focus from an individual issue to a multi-generational family dynamic. So his theory was basically that families function as an emotional unit. So yes, you're working with someone and they have some issues and they have some problems, but it's part of a larger scale. It's part of the multi-generational dynamic. So he realized that when there were unresolved tensions across generations, he was able to predict certain type of patterns. That's a smart man, ain't it? So that's pretty much what he did. So some of the key concepts are differentiation of self. Now, it's important because this is a term you're going to see or a term you need to understand and know. As I explain with you guys all the time, I'm breaking it down and helping you for the exam. But even when you pass the exam, you're going to be a licensed professional. The expectation and the standard that not only society has on you or your job has on you, but what you should have on yourself should be higher. It should be greater. You work really hard to get to where you are. So the way you carry yourself, the knowledge you have, the expectations that you have for yourself should be higher and greater. I'm not one that really cares a lot about what other people think and what other people say, because I know that when Ariza wakes up, she works on being the best version of herself. And with me carrying the title as an LCSW, people automatically assume that I know certain things or assume that I'm the go-to person to gain information about things. And, I just don't want to lead them to thinking that they're wrong. So I do practice my craft and I constantly make sure that I educate myself and stay abreast on different things so I know how to handle topics, situations, discussions, jobs, all that kind of stuff when it comes to me. So just keep that in mind, guys. I always share this with my supervisees. You're not just trying to pass this test and walk around and just do whatever you do. It's a higher standard, it's a higher expectation. So make sure you always continue to study. So even after you pass this exam, you might want to swing back through and just hit the channel up so you can stay abreast on certain topics and things. So when we talk about differentiation of self, this is pretty much the cornerstone of Bowen's theory. So the differentiation describes one's ability to balance emotional reactivity with intellectual reasoning. So yes, we have a way that we react emotionally, but we also have to have that intellectual reasoning that allows us to make decisions and do certain things. So when our lower differentiation manifests, we have fusion between our thoughts and our feelings. We have chronic anxiety when it comes to our relationships and our connections with others. We have a rigid adherence to our family roles and what this person does and what this person should do. So a highly differentiated individual maintains autonomy while staying emotionally connected. So it's really important. A skill tested in a lot of scenarios will involve like enmeshment or emotional cutoff. You're going to see these types of terms. So when you're looking at differentiation of self, you want to make sure that you understand if this person is at the lower differentiation or higher differentiation. If they're at a lower differentiation, then obviously you're going to see a lot of this issues, the chronic anxiety, the fusion between their emotions and their feelings, and this family role and this family role, all those types of things. But when somebody's a little bit mature and they've kind of worked on self and they're at a certain place and they've elevated, they're emotionally connected. So they understand how to handle these types of things, and they can recognize enmeshment and emotional cutoff, and all those types of things can be handled appropriately. So that is Bowen. Make sure you understand those key terms. You don't have to know it in detail, but just recognize if you see something like emotional cutoff, enmeshment, if you see something like differentiation of self, you know you're looking at Bowen. And that just kind of helps keep you centered on what terms and how you should answer that question. Let's talk about triangulation dynamics. Triangulation dynamics. Bowen identified triangles, and I know you guys have seen it. Triangles are like a 3-person relationship system. See, I can throw that up because you know I'm a DST. But anyways, as you're using the building blocks of family stress, exam questions often present those problems where you have to recognize like that triangulation within a family dynamic. So a child becomes entangled in a parental conflict. You got the mom, the dad, and the child. So you have that triangle going. You have the grandparents who's trying to help mediate the parent-child dispute. So you got the grandma here, the mama here, the child here. So you can see in these triangular dynamics, you see 3 different people and there's different things that are happening in that situation. So not to confuse you when it comes to the test, if you see triangular dynamics or something along with the triangle, then you already know you're thinking who? Bowen. Yes, we're still sticking on your boy Bowen. So make sure you keep that in mind. A lot of times siblings also form that alliance against other family members. It can be the brother, the sister, and then it can be the cousin that they have that triangular effect with, or maybe the mom or the grandmom or whoever it is. So de-triangulation techniques involve coaching clients so they can address these conflicts directly rather than through these third parties. So let me back up a little bit. I got to make sure y'all understand this. So when it comes to the triangular effect, as a therapist, you want to make sure that's not taking place and not happening. You want to make sure that instead of adding that third piece in there, the individuals are able to connect and understand and communicate with one another more effectively so it doesn't have that triangulation dynamic. That is not something that you want and that you're desiring to have within that relationship system. So let's talk about multi-generational transmission. Throwing out all the terms today. So I hope you got your pencil and your paper and you kind of jotting this down. Some of you are taking pictures of the screen. But again, if you're in the course and in the community, you just got to hit me up and say, hey, that PowerPoint that you use for that, can you throw it at a sister or throw it at a brother? And I got you. Are you studying for the LCSW or LMSW exam? Don't waste time on the wrong prep. Try my test prep program for free with a full module that gives you the real strategies, the real practice, and real results. Plus, you get access to my exclusive test prep community where you'll find support, study material, and accountability. No risk, no stress, just results. Click the link in the bio so you can get ready to win with the winning team. All right, so when it comes to multi-generational transmission, this concept explains how differentiation levels perpetuate across all these generations. So here's an example. A parent with a low differentiation, remember we talked about differentiation in the other, about 2 slides ago, so you want to pause and go back and understand it, you can. They may project their anxiety onto their child through over-involvement, like they're worried and concerned. Oh my God, they're getting on the bus. So many things happen on the bus these days. And they're so stressed and so overwhelmed that they're putting that anxiety onto their child. And that's because of how they're overly involved and just into the process. Another family projection processes could create identified parents who carry unresolved family issues. So you have a mom that is still dealing with parental issues with her mother, or you have a mom that has some dynamics going on with her spouse. A lot of times these things can be projected on other individuals in the family, which cause problems. So you want to make sure you have an understanding of this, or you can recognize it if the test question presents itself. Because in the ASWB questions, they ask a lot about genealograms, intergenerational trauma patterns, all those types of things. This is what you're thinking of. You're thinking of these family patterns and you're sticking towards Bowen. So let's talk about Minuchin. I like that. Salvador Minuchin. Structural family therapy. So the core principles here is that family has hierarchies. So you're thinking of I'm thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but families also have hierarchies, and they also have boundaries. Boundaries, permeability is what is staying here. These are terms that you want to recognize, you want to understand. So some key exam areas that you will hear and often recognize or see when you're dealing with Minuchin are the family subsets. So he believed in structural family therapy, and there are three critical subsets. You have the parental subset, that requires clear generational boundaries. And then you have the sibling subset that functions between more peer level. They're more on the same connection, same peer level. And then you have the extended family that should support without undermining the parental authority. So yes, you have your aunt, you have your uncle, you got your grandmama, you got your godmama, all these other people involved in your life. However, these extended family members should not undermine the mother and the father, which are the parental authority figures. So you have to keep that in mind. If you're on the sibling subset, y'all on the same level. Y'all can joke, play around, say whatever you want, but there's certain things that you're not going to joke and play around when it comes to the parental one. There's clear generational boundaries of what you can and cannot do. So that is pretty much how Minuchin looked at the family therapy. It was very structured in that approach. So let's talk about boundary assessment. This is where therapists evaluate boundaries on a continuum. So sometimes they can have enmeshed relationships. That's where they're just overly involved, overly sharing their issues with their marriage, with their children. The mom is sitting up talking to the daughter about how her dad, blah, blah, blah. It's just a lot of enmeshment, and there's not clear boundaries there. And then you can have the disengagement. That's where it's excessively rigid, where we just don't talk about certain things. And the child's like, Mom, I was thinking we don't address that. Just eat your supper. So these families are very rigid. They're more like strangers or people just coexisting together, but they don't have that connection. So it's really important, of course, as a therapist, to make sure you help the family find a healthy median. Because if they're too enmeshed, that's very problematic. And they're too disengaged, that's very problematic. So you want to make sure you have these boundaries in place where they can feel comfortable sharing certain things, but they're connected as a family and they don't feel like they're a stranger just living with a group of individuals. So that is something you want to keep in mind. Minuchin had a joining technique. That is pretty much where adopting the family's communication style to help build rapport was frequently tested as the first intervention step. So think about it. If you're working with a client and you are a family therapist and you are utilizing Minuchin's techniques and his process of how he worked with families during the beginning stages, because it says the first intervention. So when you're working with a client during a very initial part of serving them, you adopt that family's communication style just to build a rapport and build a connection with them. Because if you're too enmeshed, as the therapist, hopefully you understand what I'm saying. If you're just too involved and happy and hey, we can ready to do this session and that's a little too loosey-goosey for some families that might be really disengaged and very rigid. They might look like, what are you doing? Who is this person working with us? So you want to kind of adapt their style. Not fully, but enough that the clients will feel comfortable engaging with you and being able to see things from your lens. All right, so we have boundary assessment. Now let's go into restructuring techniques. So as an exam taker, you want to recognize these terms: unbalancing, enactments, and boundary making. So when it comes to unbalancing, that is temporarily siding with a less powerful member to shift hierarchies. So maybe instead of aligning and connecting yourself with the mother who has all the authority and seems to be the head of that hierarchy, you go to a less powerful member. Maybe you connect with the child or the aunt or whomever that is in the room that you can see it's not as a high dynamic as that parent. So you kind of help shift it a little bit. by aligning with the other individual. And then you have enactments. That's pretty much observing the family interactions in the session. So sometimes as therapists, I'm speaking from a therapeutic lens because I do outpatient, but as a therapist, sometimes we can just sit back and observe. We don't always have to say and do something. We can just observe the family interactions just to see how things are going, like how they handle certain situations. Sometimes my couples, they might just go back and forth, and I just watch for a moment. They're like, whoa, like a fly in the wall. And then, of course, I'll eventually intervene and I will address some of the things that I saw, but I give them a chance to get it out so I can truly see how things are done when I'm not around. Because I'm not always going to be there. So it's really important for me to understand how things are taking place when I'm not there so I can actually provide them with some tools and some strategies to handle these situations when it comes up. And of course, I'm not there. Another one is boundary making, physically repositioning members to alter interaction patterns. So this is something that is an example of restructuring technique that is done in this category. And then you can understand how like Salvador Minuchin agreed with doing a lot of this type of techniques. So this is something that I hope is very helpful and you're able to at least at minimum recognize certain terms and understand which theories it kind of falls under. So a 2025 ASWB practice question tested identification of disengaged families through their lack of daily interactions. So this is a little tidbit. So there has been a test question that popped up on an exam, and this is pretty much what it addressed and talked about. It addressed the disengagement of families and their lack of daily interaction. So it's important to understand how these terms might show up, how you might see them so you can be better prepared. All right, let's move on to Virginia Satir, the growth model. So let's talk about communication stances. According to Satir, she identified 4 dysfunctional communication patterns that are frequently tested in role play scenarios. The first one is placating. Placating is when you're avoiding conflict through excessive agreement because you don't want to, so you're more passive. You don't really want to argue or go back and forth to disagree. So you kind of avoid it by just overly agreeing with everything. And then you have blaming. That is aggressive accusation to deflect vulnerability. So instead of appearing to be vulnerable and deflecting, you might want to address something head on. But a communication stance that Virginia recognized was that people typically will blame, and the aggressive accusation is normally there because they're trying to deflect and not feel vulnerable in their communication style and how they approach. And then you have the super reasonable. That is just intellectualizing emotions. So they kind of connect and they're able to be a lot more reasonable with situations and circumstances because they're pretty intelligent with how they handle their emotions and how they see other people needing support or handling theirs. And then you have irrelevance. That is using humor or distraction to avoid authentic engagement. So you can see how these 4 communication stances can be unhealthy. And then I'm sure some people can tap in because we're social workers and we're all about empowerment and positive thinking and connecting and believing that everything is great. So we can help people understand how they can have these dysfunctional communication patterns, but things they can do to make it better. She also had a temperament reading exercise, and this was structured family check-ins, and it appears where questions about improving family communication would take place. So that is the temperament reading exercise. Not sure if you're going to see it on the exam, but this is what came up with Virginia Satir's growth model, so I'm just sharing it with you. But I would want you to understand that there's some dysfunctional communication patterns, maybe not memorizing them all, but just having an understanding of what some of them are. All right, so let's move on to self-esteem focus. Satir believed that low self-esteem underpins most family dysfunction. So according to her, most of the time there's family dysfunction because there's some low self-esteem and there's some things that are going on within the family that makes it a little bit more difficult for individuals to feel comfortable and free to share and express themselves and address issues, especially as it pertains to communication. So family sculpting, are you going to see this term again? Probably so. So family sculpting is physically arranging members to represent relational dynamics. That is a process. And then you also have the parts party. That is internalizing internal conflicts through role play. You guys are very familiar with role playing, but maybe you've never heard of parts party. So this is just some terms to think about. Do I want you to memorize them? No. I just want you to understand and know if something popped up and you saw these terms, you're like, oh, Virginia Satir. That was her. So typically when you're taking the exam and you're going through these questions, they'll ask you stuff like this one says exam questions may present clients struggling with self-worth and maybe struggling with these terms. You would ask about Satir's informed intervention. So it might give an example of Johnny has been struggling with low self-esteem and he's been attending, family therapy with his mom and dad for the last 2 months. And according to Satir, what would be the best intervention or blah, 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 something like that. And it might give it to you. Or it might say, which family therapists or focus more on family sculpting as a process to help clients, da, 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 da. You get the gist. And then you will look at the different terms and you're like, not Minuchin. I don't know. Maybe it's Bowen. Oh no, that is Satir. That's pretty much how it goes. You want to know process of elimination. So guys, I'm not really big on memorization. I don't think you need to try to memorize all this stuff because you will go crazy trying to memorize it. And I've been licensed for almost a decade and a half. And trust me, a sister does not memorize all these terms and all these definitions. However, when something pops out, I'm familiar with this term or familiar with what it might be about or who it might fall under. And that's why I'm saying just kind of understand some of these key terms and concepts and who it falls under. Family life chronology. This pretty much is an assessment tool that maps critical family events across generations. So here's an example, how a grandparent's immigration story influences current family values. A lot of clients that you're working with, they come from different cultures. So they might have came and grew up in a way because they're first generation individual that came to the United States, or they grew up in one country and moved here at a young age and their children don't understand the struggle and how things are. So a lot of these things can influence how the family sees things and their certain values. Grandparents and parents might value education, so they might not understand that their child wants to be a gamer or a YouTuber or something else that is not traditional because they made a sacrifice to get them here and they hope that they will pursue a career or something that was going to help the family overall feel proud, feel connected, one of them to be a doctor, lawyer, whatever, or social worker, or whatever it is. So, you want to be mindful of how family life chronology can actually change and shape the patterns within a family. And then also the impact of economic downturns on parenting styles, how you're raised and how you are, your socioeconomic status and how you are able to do things on an economic basis definitely has an impact on how you parent. So the ASWB exam might ask you about using timelines to contextualize presenting problems, like recognizing when something took place in the family and how it's still taking place here. That's just pretty much looking at the chronology of a family. So those are some terms and some assessment tools that you can use if that's something you're interested in. We're going to break this simple and I'm going to go ahead and just give you a comparative analysis for the exam success. We're going to talk about the 3. So pretty much if you are taking the exam and you see something that's talking about multi-generational patterns, think Bowen. If you see something talking about family structure, you got that structural family therapy, which is Minuchin. If you see something talking about communication and self-esteem, you're thinking Satir. Some of the techniques you're going to hear with Bowen are geneograms, coaching. These are the concepts. So this to me, even though I gave you a whole lot beforehand, this to me is where I put my focus on. It's like, Minuchin, boundary setting, enactments, Satir, sculpting, role play. I'm going to remember these techniques and I'm going to remember the focus of this specific theorist as it pertains to what they focused on when it dealt with family therapy. When it talks about the ASW weight, it's basically showing that about 15 to 20% of questions appear with family therapy about Bowen. So it's not saying that you're going to get 15 to 20% of questions as a total. No, it's showing in previous exams that pretty much a question about Bowen when it's dealing with family therapy might show up 15 to 20% for that, how many times it shows up on the test, which really isn't a whole lot, guys, in the grand scheme of things. I know sometimes it might be harder to understand and comprehend these, so I'm going to slow it down a little bit. The exam has certain categories and certain percentages of each thing. So let's just say ethics is 19%. What they're saying is that, let's just say, we're not even going to use ethics. Ethics is 19%, but let's just say 25% or something in intervention and treatment planning or something like that in that section. So if we're in that section, there is a 15 to 20% chance in that one section that's about weighted 25% of the exam, that you're likely to see a question on Bowen as it pertains to genealograms and coaching. Does that make sense? And the same thing with Minuchin. It's a 25 to 30% chance. So it's not highly likely. It's not a 50-50. It's not 50% of the time people are taking a test and they get a question about Bowen, Minuchin, or Satir. It's just telling you that if a question comes up about family therapy, there's about a 15 to 20% there's a question on Bowen, 25 to 30 on Minuchin. So we can see Minuchin's the popular one here. And when it comes to Satir, it's only about a 10 to 15% chance. So that's very, very minimal. Because in that whole section, that 25, let's say 25 to 30% section, you're going to have dozens of questions about stuff, like all hitting you from all different angles. But if it happens to be a family therapy question and it's asking you about an intervention or how you work with families, there's for that one question, about 15% of the time it'll be a Bowen answer, or 25% is a Minuchin, and 10% is a Satir. All right, I know I spent way too long on that, but I just didn't want you guys to walk away looking at this chart or taking a picture or sending it to a friend and they're like, oh my God, 20% of the exam is going to be on Bowen, and then they're studying Bowen for like a whole day and they never get a question on it. So that's why I wanted to emphasize it. Sometimes we can get wrapped up in the details of things and not really focus on the grand scheme of it. So that's why I wanted to bring it to the grand scheme. All right. So some high yield exam strategies. You want to understand differentiation versus enmeshment. Those are Bowen scenario test questions. While Minuchin-based questions access structural interventions, you're normally going to hear about the enmeshment, subsystems, and so forth. And then you have boundary interventions. That's a Minuchin thing. You want to focus on boundary making. It appears in like 1 to 5 structural therapy questions. So see, this is breaking it down a little bit more. And then communication patterns. Satir stances help answer questions about family conflict, resolution styles. These are the types of things you're likely to see. So when you're studying the exam and you're focusing on family therapy section or interventions with that, I'm just going to focus on that little right here, the focus on what these are about, what are the techniques, and then what is the likelihood that I'm going to see differentiation versus enmeshment. I'm going to understand that Bowen scenarios on the test deal with emotional fusion. Dealing with Minuchin is more mesh subsystems. So I'm able to kind of look and see if I see that term on the test, I'm thinking, oh, differentiation of self. Oh, that's a Bowen thing. Structural intervention family. Oh, that's a Minuchin thing. You can kind of put it together where you don't have to study and overload your brain, just kind of associated with these individuals. All right, guys, I hope this video was hella helpful. A lot of information that we unpacked about family systems, but you got 3 of them down pat. I don't know why I pulled it. You got 3 of them down pat, which is going to be very helpful if these questions pop up. It's going to be an easy win for you because you're going to be able to remember some things after watching this video. Remember, if you master these 3 theories, it requires you understanding some of their unique contributions to the clinical world, but you can also break it down to have better understanding. Bowen's differentiation scale, Minuchin structural maps, and Satir's communication models. They provide about 60 to 65% of the family therapy questions that you're likely to see in the ASWB exam. So that is why your girl gave you this, because I'm not going to spend time talking about all the other ones when there's like a 30 to 40% chance you'll get a question on that as it pertains to theory. I'm going to focus on this. All right, so that is about it, guys. I hope this was very helpful for you. Make sure you take some pictures, make sure you took some notes, make sure you go back and rewatch this video because these are some easy points that I want you to be able to win and get. Here goes an exam strategy checklist. You know your girl is always doing the most and adding some little extra stuff in there because I know you guys be pulling out your little smartphones and taking pictures and stuff and then downloading them, creating your own little funny test prep folders. We all have them filled with papers and binders and stuff everywhere that overloads our brain. And I don't want you to do that. That was a joke, but I'm being serious because I know half of you watching this video have this big old binder like this one here. And it's just filled with all this test prep stuff. And people keep sending you stuff like, oh, my homegirl gave me that. They said this helped her pass the exam. My other friend gave me that. And you walking around with all this material and you just stressed out, not knowing where to start and where to begin. That's why you get in the course. Yeah. Because if you get in the course, we already got in there everything that you need to know. You don't need to do all this extra stuff. All right. So make sure you understand that. This is just a quick snippet to let you understand some of the recent trends because I always have people ask me about the ASWB exam and all this stuff. So I've been doing a little bit more deep diving into some recent exam trends to kind of see what's been coming up and what's been popping up to make sure we stay relevant. So I'm not going to read all this, guys, but this is just some recent trends that they found in some of the exams as it pertains to the family dynamics. I hope you found this to be helpful. Overall, if you master Bowen, Minuchin, and Satir theories, it's going to give you good information. So these areas will be heavily emphasized on the ASWB exam. If you get these type of interventions, you will know them. Understanding their individual theories and how they intersect helps you as one of the exam candidates handle complex family situations effectively. And it's a crucial skill you just need to have. So it don't even matter about the exam for real. If you work with families, I don't care if you're an individual therapist, a family therapist, working at a community center, you need to understand how these show up and how they appear when working with clients that are of a family unit. I'm definitely done. And I hope you guys enjoyed yourself. And until the next one, be blessed. Make sure you share this content with a friend. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. That's how I keep these videos coming. When you guys show me love, I'm going to continue to show you love and bless you with these amazing videos. It's going to help you learn and lock in so you can come back and tell me how you passed that exam.